Dr. Blaser, can you connect the missing microbes and asthma?
It all starts with H. pylori. We developed the first really good blood test to tell if a person had H. pylori or not. And that opened a lot of doors for us. We made the association between H. pylori and stomach cancer and deepened the association with ulcers. We discovered a form of H. pylori that has a gene called CAG-A. We discovered that actually using my own serum in tests. And so we could distinguish between two different subtypes of H. pylori, one which is more interactive with people and the other is less interactive. The more interactive is called the CAG-A positive strain. I'm not a gastroenterologist. My specialty is infectious diseases, but I had a lot of gastroenterologists working with me. And one day I said to one of the gastroenterologists, I've heard a lot about this disease called reflux or GERD. Why don't we see whether there's an association with H. pylori or not? Thinking that there might be, because the thing about GERD is that it was an increasing disease. It was a disease that wasn't seen until the 1930s. It wasn't in the medical literature till the 1930s. So we did the study. It's recounted in the book. And he came back to me. He said, this is funny. There's an inverse association. People who have GERD less often have H. pylori than others. And then it occurred to me that maybe H. pylori is protective against GERD. Maybe the reason that GERD is going up is because H. pylori is disappearing. So we did close to 10 other studies on GERD, on Barrett's esophagus, on adenocarcinoma of the esophagus. All of these showed an inverse association with this. So it became clear to me that Helicobacter is bad for your stomach, but good for your esophagus. At some point, because I'm a medical doctor, I knew that there's a relationship between reflux and asthma. There are people who start wheezing. Their doctor treats them with something to suppress gastric acidity and their asthma gets better. That's well known in physicians. In adult onset asthma, that might be 10% of asthma. It's not rare. So I thought, well, if Helicobacter protects against reflux, maybe it protects against asthma. And of course, asthma, I knew, was one of these increasing diseases, increasing as H. pylori was going away. So it was a reasonable hypothesis. So at that point, I was at Vanderbilt University. I tried to get the pulmonary people interested in this idea to test it. And there was some interest, but nobody would test it. And then I moved to NYU. I became the chair of medicine. People at NYU were more responsive. There was one physician there who had a big asthma clinic. I said, let's do this test. You give me serum from people who have asthma and people controls who do not have asthma. Send it to us blindly, and we will see, is there any relationship with H. pylori? So they did that. And actually, I recount this in the book. It's one of the more dramatic moments in my career. Joan Reibman writes to me and she says, you're right, there's an inverse association between H. pylori and asthma. She said, but the results aren't that great. Maybe we should discuss it. So they come to my office, she and a couple of other colleagues. She starts showing me the data. The odds ratio was 0.7, I remember it, which is an inverse association. And it was statistically significant. The study had about 500 people. So I said, oh, that's nice. Well, what about CAG-A? CAG-A is the most important because that's the one that's the most interactive. And what we found with esophageal disease, CAG-A strains are the most bad strains. They're most associated with stomach cancer and ulcers. And for esophageal disease, they're also the most good strains. They're the ones that are most protective. How is that possible? It's because they're the most interactive. The other ones are not nearly as interactive. So one of the people on her team was a statistician. He had his laptop and he said, oh, I can just calculate this right now. And he taps a couple things in his computer, says odds ratio 0.6. It was even stronger. This was a blinded study. That was the first study. And then about a couple weeks later, a new epidemiologist came to NYU. She said, I've been told to look you up because you were doing interesting work. And I said, well, I'm really interested in asthma. There are these big national studies called the NHANES study. Why don't we look at asthma and NHANES, because we had a contract some years earlier and we ran H. pylori serology on 11,000 people as part of NHANES. So why don't you go to the NHANES database, find those 11,000 people and see if there's any relationship with H. pylori. And what she found is, yes, same thing, inverse relationship, almost exactly the results from New York. So we have two independent blinded studies, one with 500 people and one with 11,000 people. Both showed the same thing. And what was interesting is that we could divide asthma into two classes: childhood onset asthma and adult onset asthma. And the association was not with adult onset asthma, it was only with childhood onset asthma. And then there were several NHANES studies, and they did H. pylori serology in another one, and we did that study as well, and we found almost the same results. So 3 large, independent, blinded studies all showed the same thing. So what was clear is the lack of H. pylori is a marker for risk of asthma, for childhood onset asthma. Really clear. Others have been working on this, but I think these were the 3 most definitive studies. And then a very good scientist in Zurich, Anne Mueller, began doing mouse experiments. There's a way that you can give asthma to mice. There are different mouse models of asthma. And she asked, how about if she gives H. pylori back to these mice, can she protect them against asthma? And she could. And then she worked out many of the details of the mechanism, how H. pylori is involved in a lot of this regulatory work. The mechanism is there. I've been working extensively with Dr. Mueller for the last 4 or 5 years to continue this work. And we've got a couple papers already published, and we have more papers that we're working on, about to submit, about microbes and asthma. Some of it is H. pylori,